Welcome back to Tales Arcane, where we talk about D&D, TTRPGs, and fantasy storytelling. If you want to run a one-shot, a single D&D adventure that takes place across the course of one session, you're in the right place. In this video, I'm going to lay out the 5 rules I use to build and run successful one-shots. As always, if you want to support what I do here on the channel, you can back me on the Tales Arcane Patreon. There's a link to my Patreon down below this video, and when you sign up, you can get access to more than 1,000 pages of my original D&D homebrew content that includes encounters, campaign settings, adventures, battle maps, and a lot more. Thank you to everyone who already supports me over there or who is considering supporting me in the future. Now let's talk about one-shots. The first rule for building a good one-shot is to choose a single goal and then focus the one-shot around that goal. It could be to solve a murder, to succeed in a heist and steal a gemstone, to find and kill a dangerous monster. Essentially, the goal is what this one-shot is all about. In a normal D&D campaign, you can have multiple goals overlapping and ongoing at once. Maybe the players start investigating a murder, but that is revealed to be the work of a monster. Now it's a monster hunt. Maybe the monster is being backed or unleashed by some powerful noble. Now it's a court intrigue. And that's fine because you've got something in a D&D campaign that you don't have in a one-shot, and that is time. In a one-shot, where you only have a few hours at your disposal, you want to take that core goal and get your players focused on that as early as possible. For example, I'm running a one-shot tonight, and it's going to be in a pirate setting. So I went to my players and I said, roughly what is it you are excited to do with each other and with this setting? And what they said was they wanted to focus on roleplay and they wanted to cause chaos. They wanted to be agents of chaos. With that in mind, I prepared a one-shot with a single goal: to attend an event and cause a disruption that will ruin the event. The players are going to go to a pirate tavern that has just opened and try to sow as much discord and chaos among the various pirate captains in attendance so the night is ruined. They've been hired by the owner of a rival pirate tavern. Now, of course, we could add more to that. Maybe the players, for their own reasons, want to steal a magical item from one of the captains in attendance. Maybe there's a sea monster in the area that the players will have to defeat on their way to or from the tavern. Of course, we can add more, but this is a one-shot, so we're not going to do any of that. You can already see a theme emerging here. We're trying to battle with the time constraints imposed by the structure of a one-shot. And that's because, basically, everything in D&D takes longer than you expect. Which brings us to rule 2. Players are going to spend way more time role-playing in the opening scene than you planned for. Combat encounters are going to be twice as long as you thought they would be. And this is just the nature of D&D. It always takes longer than you think it's going to take. And this is especially true in one-shots, where players are probably going to be working with characters they've never role-played before, potentially using classes that are not familiar to them. Things are going to run a little bit slower than you might expect. Rule 1 is going to help a lot here, but another great tip for keeping things moving at a good pace is what I call modular content. Essentially, scenes and pieces of content, NPCs, monsters, that you can slot in and out of the plot depending on how much time you have, without the players realizing that anything has been removed or added. For example, if you're running a dungeon where the players are going room by room towards a final battle with a boss, you can have rooms that you know you can just slot out if the players are taking too long. And the players might never know that. They open one door and you just kind of move them into a room 3 rooms along from what you'd originally planned, and the players won't realize, and you're keeping everything on pace. You could do this in a more roleplay focused thing by just having less NPCs in play at any one time. Another way to speed things up is to have all the characters know each other at the start of the adventure, essentially to have a pre-formed party. I know it can be fun to have the players all meet for the first time and introduce themselves, but we don't really have a lot of time here, so instead have the players all be a formed party that's been on the road for a little while, and then you just start the adventure by saying, you've been on the road travelling together for a little while, you've wandered into a new town, and you're settling down at the local tavern for some drinks when something happens and the adventure begins. And the players can then introduce themselves to each other and say, yeah, I'm playing X, this is my race, my character class and everything, but we don't have to have extended roleplay sequences where people explain to each other, you know, in character who they are and where they've come from. This might feel a little rushed, it might feel a bit like railroading, and that's not necessarily a bad thing in the context of a one-shot. A mistake I see a lot of newer GMs making is thinking that a one-shot is essentially just like a single session of a campaign, and that all the same rules apply to a one-shot as would apply to a single session within a longer campaign. But that's not the case. A one-shot is its own entity, and a different structure and a different approach is going to be needed. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you know that I like to use a 5-step template when I'm designing my adventures, but that template doesn't always work as well for time-constrained one-shots. With a one-shot, I'm usually looking at a really simple 3-act structure. In Act 1, the players are all going to get together and be given a quest. There might be a little bit of roleplay, but within half an hour to 45 minutes max, we are out the door and into the main portion of the adventure, Act 2. In Act 2, we're going to have some challenges that the players are going to have to overcome to get to Act 3, where they can achieve their ultimate goal. And these challenges, I like to keep them to 1 or 2 at most. Perhaps 1 environmental or roleplay challenge, and 1 combat-focused challenge. Although again, you can just have 1 challenge if you want, if you're strapped for time. So a challenge might be, let's say our players are climbing up a mountain to go and enter the lair of a dragon to steal a rare gemstone from the dragon, and that's their ultimate goal. Steal gemstone from dragon. Along the way in Act 2, they have to climb up this mountain and infiltrate the dragon's lair. So first, as they climb up that mountain, there's maybe a rock fall, and they have to deal with that. They're losing HP, they're having to help each other out, scrambling up through this dangerous environment. Then they enter the lair of the dragon, and there's some kobolds who have set up camp there, and there's an ambush and a bit of combat. That ends Act 2, and Act 3 begins as we come face to face with the dragon and the final goal. The players fight the dragon in Act 3, they get the gemstone, and they return very quickly, almost in a sort of travel montage, back down to the village where they started. They claim their prize, and it's drinks all round at the local tavern. Game over. Very bare bones, I know, but we don't want to add too much meat to these bones because, again, we don't have a huge amount of time. And the thing is, the less content you try to stuff in, the more the content that is there will get a chance to breathe, and the more the players can engage deeply with each section of the adventure, rather than having to be kind of rushed from one thing to the next. Now, as an alternative to everything I just said, you might not want to do a quest. You might want to have everything take place in basically one location, perhaps with more of a focus on roleplay, and in which case you're going to have your Act 2 as the majority of the adventure, where most of the stuff is going to happen, and you're probably going to save your kind of light modular content for Act 3 at the end, just kind of if you have time for it. For example, in the one-shot I'm running tonight, the Disruption one-shot, Act 2 is going to take up almost the whole adventure, and that's going to be the scene where the players are in the tavern, the pirate tavern, causing trouble, however they want to cause trouble. At the end, as they're leaving, I might have the tavern owner come out and confront them and have a bit of combat, but if we don't have time, I'll just drop that off, and they'll just go straight back to where they started, drinks all round, end of the game. The next 2 rules focus on combat. First, we're going to talk about the balancing of your combat encounters, how to get the right difficulty and challenge level for a one-shot. And then we're going to talk about the pacing and speed of those combat encounters, how we can keep them moving rapidly so that the combat encounter doesn't drag out and take up too much time at the back end of a short one-shot. But first, we're also going to talk about today's sponsor. I use Describe for all my home games, and that's because of Describe's Opus feature. It's a massive collection of TTRPG music, sound effects, and ambience that you can layer together in real time. But Opus has also become the main way that I manage prep in general. Here's how I prep for a game with Opus. First, I create a new collection, and within that collection, I create a series of blocks. A block is like a scene or a location within the game. One block might be a tavern, or a corrupted forest, or even a general event like combat. All the blocks appear in a list at the side so you can easily jump between them. In each block, I'm going to add music, sound effects, and ambience, creating custom soundboards for each scene that might come up in the game ahead. I add spell sounds, battle cries, different kinds kinds of music, and I can layer, loop, and level them all as I go along. Along with your audio, you can add in your own text, so I add all the notes I'll need for any given scene. In one block I might have the NPC information and a description of the area. In another, important reminders about environmental effects that are likely to come up for that scene. Essentially, Opus has become my DM screen. It's such an intuitive way to organise all my notes and my audio in one place, and I would really recommend this to any GM who likes to do a bit of prep before they run their games. If you want to get an extended 3-week free trial on Describe, you can head to the link below this video and use the coupon code TalesArcane, all capital letters, all one word. Thank you to Describe for sponsoring this video. Now this is personal preference, but when I'm running a one-shot, I want combat to be a lot more dangerous than it is in a normal campaign. When you're balancing combat encounters in your regular long-term home game and a campaign, you don't want every encounter to have a 50-50 chance of a TPK, a total party kill, because in that case, your campaign wouldn't last very long. Very quickly the players would roll badly, the monsters would roll well, and a couple of sessions in your whole party would be dead and you'd have to start over. That isn't really what we mean when we talk about balancing in a normal context. Normally, balancing means creating a combat encounter that feels very challenging, but is ultimately weighted in the player's favour. Maybe 1 or 2 players go to death saving throws, maybe in a boss fight 1 or 2 players even die permanently, but ultimately the party endures because it's balanced for that outcome. In a one-shot, while I'm not hoping for a TPK, I do raise the chances of a TPK considerably. And the reason for this is ultimately the stakes. I want my players to be invested and excited in the game, and that's kind of hard to do when it's a one-shot and the players know that nothing here really matters long term. The players have one little goal to complete, and after that they might never return to these characters or to this world or to these NPCs. You can't expect them to be too invested in getting gold, for example, because they're probably never going to get a chance to spend it. However, one thing they are probably invested in is the characters they've created. Even if it is just for this one session, they're going to be excited to see how these characters run in practice, and a great way to get them very engaged is to really threaten those characters. When I'm running a one-shot that's going to involve some combat, I always tell my players at the start that they can win the game by surviving, and that their survival is in no way guaranteed. And I try to introduce this element where, yes, the goal is to steal the gemstone from the dragon as a party, but their goal personally is to get to the end of the session alive, and I try to raise the spectre of real and present danger that, hey, you know, I'm not going to be pulling any punches, and there is a real possibility that your character will die before the end of the session, and you want to try to beat those odds and beat me as the DM. Now, for some people, that's how they want every encounter to be, but for a lot of people, especially people who play 5e and look for a roleplay kind of character-driven story, they don't want the constant real threat of death with every encounter. They just want a sense of challenge and excitement. But I do think that one-shots are a great opportunity for GMs to get some experience running these more sort of high-wire combat encounters where things could go drastically wrong. And I think if you are a new GM, you will learn a lot about balancing from running kind of deliberately hard combat encounters in one-shots. If you have combat in your one-shot, you probably want that combat to be fast. Battles can spiral out of control with a few bad dice rolls and take way longer than you thought they would, and especially if these combat encounters are happening at the end of the one-shot, when time maybe really is ticking down and someone's got to jump up and leave for a train in like half an hour, that's when you want to be able to streamline your combat and make sure things get wrapped up on time. The first thing we want to do is limit the number of combat encounters present in the adventure. Ideally, I would say have no more than 2 combat encounters built into the plotline, unless you're doing something incredibly combat heavy where like every room is a fight and that's the point, there's no roleplay. But if you're doing a mix of roleplay and combat, have no more than 2 combat encounters, and make sure that the first of those 2 combat encounters, presumably the sort of smaller, lower stakes combat encounter, is modular, so if you have to, you can cut it. Another good approach if you are going to have 2 combat encounters in there is to have the first one be almost optional. Create a clever workaround. Perhaps the players are confronted by a monster, but they can see there's a particular area of the ground in front of them, and maybe some wooden boards on the bridge they're on that are rotten, and if they can tempt the goad the enemy into walking over those boards and then maybe attack the boards, fire an arrow at them, they can cause that portion of the bridge to collapse, plunging that monster down into the ravine below, they'll get a sense that they've cleverly defeated the monster, but you don't have to run any combat there. When we come to that big final combat encounter, the one that is going to cap off the whole session, we want that to be epic, we want it to feel very dangerous, as I talked about in Rule 4. We also don't want it to drag, so the simplest way to do this is just to give the monster less HP. One of the worst things that can happen in a combat encounter is if the monster is a damage sponge and it just soaks up a lot of damage and stays around for a long time, things start to get boring and you start running out of time. So instead, make the monster more dangerous, give it more attacks, give it a higher attack modifier, so more of its attacks land, maybe give it higher damage output, more damage die when it does hit, but take its HP down. I like to maybe cut its HP by at least maybe 25%, even a third, so that while it's around, the players have this sense that they're probably only 3 or 2 hits away from dying, maybe 1 crit away from dying, but the monster goes down relatively quickly. I also want to include a few minions in the battle. This will help with action economy. The minions can run in and break concentration if the players are getting some powerful spells cast, neutralizing the boss too early in the combat. But the one thing you want to make sure with the minions is that they can be removed from play as soon as the boss goes down. You don't want the boss to go down, then have to spend multiple rounds cleaning up the minions. There's a couple of ways you could do this. The simplest one is just to have the minions flee. For example, goblins see the bugbear chieftain go down and they just run for the hills. They're not going to stick around. You can also have something magical. For example, a corrupted treant is the boss and they've summoned a group of twig blights. But when the treant goes down, the magic leaves the blights, and the blights kind of crumble into masses of organic debris. Or you could even have something a bit more dramatic, like the dragon is slain and in its writhing death throes, it rolls over and crushes the remaining kobolds while the players jump out of the way. Note that we're not making these allowances to make things easier for the players, we're making these allowances to make sure that the players have time to wrap up the adventure at the end and not have to kind of rush things with a quick montage and then everyone leaves to get the train. We're trying to find ways to make this feel really challenging, really dangerous, but also not have it take a million years. Anyway, that is the video. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you to everyone who backs me over on Patreon for making this channel possible, for making videos like this possible. And a huge thank you to Describe for sponsoring this video. If you do want to try Describe, you can get that extended 3-week free trial by going to the link below this video and using the coupon code TalesArcane, all capital letters, all one word, to get your extra free week. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.